So this bad debt, what we in India call NPAs, we love three-letter and NPA,
Acronyms, yes.
acronyms like non-performing assets. So will the Chinese flu hit India? Let's have a look at, again, some of the findings that Ruchi's data shows. Chinese flu in India seems to be happening because there's a collapse in trade. Now let's have a look at, globally, world trade is now down to 0%. And Ruchi, that's pretty bad. 0% doesn't happen very often.
Yes, in fact, the last time it happened was the 2008-2009 financial crisis. Typically, global trade grows at a rate which is faster than global GDP.
Right.
And now we have the global GDP growing at 2.5%, and global trade has collapsed to, global trade growth has collapsed to 0% virtually in 2015. And that usually happens when you have a global recession. Outside of a global recession, you've never had such weak trade numbers. So this is...
So that's another signal. And if you look at that impact on India, let's have a look at global trade going down. What's the impact on India been? In fact, India has had a terrible time on, there's been a complete collapse in Indian trade, down to -5% on trade, on our exports.
On exports,
yeah. On exports.
Exactly. And just to put this in perspective, that when we were growing at an 8 to 9% pace last decade, during the boom years, between 2003 to 2007, our exports were growing at 25 to 30% a year.
During those years?
Yes.
25 plus 25, 30%.
Exactly.
And
our export growth every year.
-5.
And now we are at -5. So therefore I always say that whatever GDP data we have, which show that we're growing at 7 to 8%, is just not credible. Because when your exports are sort of shrinking by 5%, to assume that your domestic demand is booming at 9 to 10% or some crazy number like that is just not realistic. It is extremely hard for any economy in the world to grow at a pace of 7 to 8% when your exports are shrinking.
-5.
Yes.
So we've heard that India is liberalizing and the whole new world, and we're becoming like the rest of the world. But you've got data which shows that India is becoming the most protectionist country in the world. Let's have a look at the number of protectionist measures that India has taken. Look at that. Worst in the world. 504 protectionist measures in the period 2008 to 2015. America 377, China 222, and we're 504. England, UK 213, and South Korea 79, and India 504. So this is kind of a knee-jerk negative reaction to a problem.
Yeah, because this is like out of control. Now there's a lot of clamor here that we need to sort of prevent dumping from Chinese steel exporters and other constituencies. But this is a bit out of control. There's something about balance. You can have some protectionist measures because you think there are some areas which are being affected. But for us to be the most protectionist country in the world is just not good news. And this is no way to try and sort of have more competition, or to try and sort
boost your economy or get things going.
Or even to get inflation down further and stuff if you become such a protectionist economy. So I think that this is, like, to me, was really troubling. This is a recent statistic that we stumbled upon, which is tabulated by a lot of independent agencies. And for India to be the most protectionist country, and in 2015, this didn't change. In fact, if you just isolate 2015, what you find is that the total number of protectionist measures taken by any country, India was the second highest after Russia. But overall...
Even in the last year?
Yes, even like in the last year. So
it's not slowing down.
That's not slowing down. And so I think that's the problem with us, that the impulse is very much status, that if there's a problem, the state wants to intervene and try and fix the problem, rather than sort of allowing business to sort it out on their own. So I think that this is something we really need to highlight more. That if we
very worrying.
Yes,
very worrying. I don't think too many people are aware of that statistic. And the other point you were mentioning is that you're talking about 7-8% growth rate of GDP when your exports are falling. And then you've got more data to say, forget exports, just look at domestic industry. Just have a look at what's happening to domestic industry. Corporate India is reeling, it's in deep trouble. This is the sales of the top 500 companies, the percentage growth in sales of the top 500 companies in India. And look at that. 2015, the sales have grown by 0%, nil growth rate. So nil growth rate in sales, minus 5% in exports. I mean, GDP should be in deep trouble, actually.
Yes, I think that, so what's happening is there's a cottage industry even in India, which is coming up just like China, which sort of forms its own indicators to try and gauge what's happening.
Different set of their own statistics.
Yeah, like in China, like they called it, like the LKQ index, like after what Premier Lee once had said about the fact that Chinese statistics are man-made and not to be trusted, as he was quoted as saying on WikiLeaks. And even in India, something similar is going on. But
so we're getting the Chinese data flu as well.
Yes, the Chinese data flu as well. And in fact, one of the big news stories last week on Wall Street was that a major fund shut down, like a major hedge fund, claiming that the data out of China and India is so unreliable that they can't invest in these countries. So this is something which is a bit of an issue. But I think that the bigger picture here is this, that corporate India's sales growth is zero. When like India was growing at a very robust pace last decade, sales of these companies were, again, growing at 25 to 30% a year. So, if you look at various metrics, exports were growing at 25 to 30% a year. We had sales were growing at 25 to 30% a year. Profits were also growing at 25, 30% a year. And what we don't show here is the fact that growth of corporate India this fiscal year is likely to be negative, possibly down maybe 10% or something like that.
And so, these are real figures.
These are real figures. These are real companies which are selling into the marketplace. So this is the entire problem, which is that if you...
They just don't match with the GDP. There is a complete...
dichotomy between these.
Dichotomy.
Yes, that's right.
And that is very worrying. So we'll get our own cottage industry statistics and people will quote other figures.
Yes, people
are
started doing
because
that.
the CSOs, the Central Statistics Organizations, had a great reputation. So what's gone wrong? We need to...
Yeah, but I think this is like an old Indian saying that I love, which is that if it ain't broke, you fix it until it is. Right. So I think that's what this is about.